Earth and welcome to Backlogged, a miniseries chronicling my quest to actually finishing at least one game per month for the whole year.
This month's game has been very high on my list for quite a while now, and seeing as its 8th anniversary just passed, it seemed like a fitting time to finally give it a go. Here's my review of Remedy's criminally underrated 2016 third-person sci-fi shooter Quantum Break. Obligatory spoiler alert from this point forward, because for once I am going to talk about the game's story, because it's so gloriously convoluted and the cast is surprisingly stacked. Our main character is Jack Joyce, played by Shawn Ashmore, who was Iceman in X-Men but was not Jimmy Olsen in Smallville. That was his twin brother Aaron, who's also an actor. I admit I had absolutely no idea these were two different people, but if you didn't either, then now you do. Anyway, the game picks up with Jack returning to his hometown after an extended absence to aid his friend Paul, whom you may know as Peter Littlefinger Baelish from a little ditty called Game of Thrones. Paul is the head of Project Promenade, and along with the aid of Jack's estranged older brother Will, who's played by Dominic Monaghan, aka Mary from Lord of the Rings, aka Charlie from Lost. Do you remember Lost? Great show. Still not sure if I really understood the ending. Anyway, I'm getting off topic again. Will was one of the head advisors for the project, and he warned of some drastic miscalculations that could cause the project to catastrophically fail. What is the project, you ask? Oh, you know, just a friggin' time machine. Exactly the type of thing you'd expect to be getting slapped together at your local university. Turns out Paul has asked you here to help wrangle Will because his rants are scaring off investors. But in order to keep the funding flowing in the meantime, Paul decides to turn the machine on to prove to everybody that it works. Jack helps Paul turn it on, but then Will shows up and tries to shut it down, while being completely confused as to why Jack is even there. But of course the machine malfunctions just like Will said it would, and fractures time as we know it. The fracture causes something called stutters, which makes time temporarily freeze. Jack also gets time powers from the event, which include being immune to said stutters, which is super convenient because immediately after the incident, they're attacked by the private military force of the super shady corporation Monarch Solutions. Paul escapes in the time machine while Jack and Will attempt to sneak away with the help of Jack's new abilities. Will says he might be able to fix the fracture if he can just get to his car. They're briefly separated on the way, and Jack runs into the mysterious Beth for the first time. She becomes a major player later on, but for now she gives Jack a tip on where to find Will and they go their separate ways. Jack isn't really sure he can trust her, but he follows her advice anyway because it's all he has to go on. Luckily, listening to Beth does pay off because he catches up to Will, and after a shootout with Monarch forces, Jack manages to free him. They're about to resume the hunt for Will's car before they're cornered by none other than an older Paul! Wait, what? Yeah, you see, it turns out that when Paul escaped into the time machine, he also developed time powers and went on a little jaunt through time that eventually landed him in 1999. Armed with the knowledge of everything that's going to happen between then and the moment he left in 2016, he pulls a Biff Tannen and makes several investments he already knows are going to pay off, using the massive fortune he accrues to fund Monarch Solutions. Yep, an older version of your old friend has been pulling the strings all along. Will tries to reason with him to try to get him to help them fix the fracture, but Paul isn't interested. He insists it can't be fixed before ordering the building blown up. Will's killed by falling debris, Jack is knocked unconscious and taken into Monarch custody, and Paul instructs his team to finish securing the time machine's core and move it to Monarch headquarters. And that's when the game throws you a curveball and briefly puts you in the shoes of Paul himself to make choices that will affect how the rest of the game plays out. This will happen at the end of every chapter, and the public image of Monarch, and even if some characters live or die, can be completely changed based on what you decide as Paul. It's an interesting idea for a character that has become fanatical to the idea that time cannot be changed to make choices that, well, change things. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Then it's time for curveball number 2. After every choice, it's time to watch an episode of the Quantum Break TV show. Yes, there is an honest-to-God tie-in show with 20-minute episodes, which also can be affected by the choices you make in-game. Again, characters may live or die based on what you choose, but like different characters that barely cross over into the game, but cross over enough that it wouldn't make a lot of sense when they do show up in-game if you didn't watch the show. I don't know how I feel about this aspect of Quantum Break as an experience. You see, this game was released as a Microsoft exclusive during the Xbox One era, when they were trying so hard to make the Xbox One everyone's all-in-one go-to media machine. I admit it's an interesting concept to have one thing affect the other, and I didn't dislike the show at all. It gives you a window into what's going on inside Monarch Solutions, while the game portion mostly follows Jack. But I don't know how I felt about having to constantly stop to watch something before I could continue playing. Maybe it's just me, but it felt like it really broke up the flow of everything. But I guess it's not much different than playing a Kojima game. Despite the weird flow though, I had tons of fun playing this game. The gunplay itself is a little bare bones with a somewhat small selection of weapons, but of course the meat of the combat is the time powers. You can do all sorts of crazy stuff like freeze enemies in place, create shields, and run up and sucker punch your enemies faster than they can possibly react. The powers aren't just for combat though, since you'll also be using them to solve puzzles and traverse the world around you. Can't jump across that gap? No worries, you can just rewind time until there was something there you can walk across. Door closing too fast? No problem, you can run so fast time slows around you. Bridge collapsing? You guessed it, just do all those things I said you can do and now you're scot-free. Side note, that whole sequence is insanely cool and it was surprisingly topical because like the day before I got to that part of the game, a ship hit the Key Bridge in Baltimore and it collapsed. So, you know, weird coincidence. The story only gets more batshit crazy from there once a second time machine gets involved and timelines begin to overlap. It's all very cool. But that doesn't mean it was a completely painless experience. Now I'm told the Xbox version is solid, but I played on PC, which has a few issues. Some things were minor, like characters not appearing in cutscenes, or the camera getting a little wonky when I used the time rush power, but I did encounter one game-breaking bug. During Chapter 2, I got to a certain spot as I crossed a construction yard where I just stopped moving. The enemies could still shoot at me, but I couldn't take damage or move or anything. I tried restarting from my last checkpoint, and it still happened. So off to Google I went, only to find that it's a known issue since the game's release and it's just never been fixed. A cutscene's supposed to trigger there, but for some reason it just doesn't. Luckily, restarting from the beginning of the chapter, not just the last checkpoint, fixed it. Maybe I should have tried that for myself, but I'm still deducting points for it never having been fixed. I'm tempted to subtract points for unskippable cutscenes too, but I'll let that slide since that's just personal preference. All in all though, I walked away from Quantum Break thinking it was criminally underrated, and I wanted more. I think there's so much potential here, and I'd hate to see it wasted. We barely scratched the surface of the story, and I didn't even touch on some of the characters like Martin Hatch, who's played by the late great Lance Reddick. It's pretty obvious Microsoft plans to do nothing with the IP at this point, even though it seems to have been well received by the majority of people that did play it. But that's Microsoft for you. I can only hope Remedy acquires the rights like they have somewhat recently with Alan Wake and Control. And you can guarantee that if it does ever get a sequel, I will be in line on day one. That's why, for me, Quantum Break gets an 8 out of 10. But as always, I want to hear from you. Did you play Quantum Break? Did you like it? Did you enjoy the show element? Or did you find it a little out of place like I did? Let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.